You like that intro, don't you?
Oh man, I love it. There's not one thing I would change.
Oh, that's good.
Like
Other than our
you
ugly
always
mugs
talked
on
about
it.
yourself as like not being like artistic or creative. That proves it could not be further from the truth because
Yeah.
even like you have like the American flag and the water drops over it, but then like our photos like to get the contrast, they're like in black and white. Like you
Yeah, I
have
thought the black
totally
and white.
opposite.
I thought the
Yeah.
black and white looked cooler. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
dude, I mean that's really I
yeah.
love that
I like the black and white.
intro.
I thought that looked awesome. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, welcome back to the show for anybody watching. So this week we're gonna go completely different from where we're at last week. Last week was a little rough.
That
Last week
was
was
very
harder.
difficult.
That was tougher than I thought it would be. Actually, it was that I was drained from the Seinfeld show just because I don't think I was prepared at all for how much we needed and how hard it was to explain.
Yeah, I agree. Like I was looking because it's got the live timer up in the left hand corner. It's like I was worried we were gonna get how are we gonna get to 30 minutes?
Yeah, yeah, I kind of hit the wall. I'm like, oh, I better find some more stuff because forget
It's
it.
a very narrow lane and like
Yeah,
how much do you want to talk about a show as opposed to just showing the clips? So it's a good thing you
right,
can.
right. Well, and showing that we can't talk about it nearly as good as
Well, yeah, it's like just show
clips
it.
can show. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So we're gonna do something totally different today. And for anybody who hasn't seen the show before, because we've only been on the new channel for a couple weeks now, uh, religion and God. Well, not religion. It's a terrible word. I hate it when people use that word. Religion's a terrible word. If you have faith in God, don't use the word religion because God is anti-religion. So don't ever use that word. It's a terrible word to use. We're going to talk about some hardships because Dano's had a week.
Yeah.
He's had a week,
Yeah, I've
a
had a
very
week, but
roller coaster week. So it really reminded both of us. We were on the same thing because I texted Dan yesterday if he had any ideas, and the first thing we both thought was the Book of Job. So we're gonna kind of get into that and talk about not only like Dan's week, but also times that I've had where I felt like Job, which is it's happened a few times. I'll admit it's happened a few times.
yeah.
So why don't you start things off? Tell us about your week.
Yeah. Well, I'll set a kind of a foundation and just to make it clear, the week I've had is not anywhere close to what Job went through.
No, no,
but
no, obviously not.
and that's not obviously not what we're trying to say, but it's there's parallels. Like, and that's what a lot of things that God provides through His Word is, we're not suffering maybe as bad as some of these people, but there's parallels with like the outcome and how it's handled and what you should do in suffering, no matter how minor or major
Yep.
it may be, because God does giveth, God taketh away, and life is seasons. So when a season comes to an end, there is, as most people don't like, change, the dreaded change word. So yeah, my job, I was there about 3.5 years. I was doing QA work, quality assurance, testing software. For me, a very creative-minded person and very, very blue collar. I like making things, like working with my hands, like building things. That was kind of a make my skin crawl job, if you will. But that make my skin crawl job paid a lot, and I worked from home. So, I had a job prior working with Phil, and it's the same idea.
Yep.
So those jobs, God provided very well through them. So, but yeah, I was there almost 4 years. Notice I'm talking in the past tense, so you can see what's coming. But I had the highest reviews I'd ever had at any job ever. I got along with my coworkers better than ever. I had the best management and bosses. I should say leaders, not bosses there, because they were leaders. And I was about a week or two away from getting my pay raise and about a month away from getting a bonus. And just out of nowhere, they did a bunch of layoffs when they just said a week ago they weren't going to. So I will not name any of the things there. But I mean, no, sometimes you can maybe see the writing on a wall at a job or something that, oh, I think this may happen, or, there's strange things afoot, if you will. rumors. There's, hey, where'd Bob go? He's not he's not here.
Right.
What happened to him?
Right.
And the company was kind of, I don't want to like knock anybody. It's not easy running a company. Trust me. I've tried. You've tried. But I think early last year in some of the meetings, they were a little overconfident, we'll say, with their giant list of clients that they think were almost thinking they were almost sure they were going to get, and then they ended up getting like, one or two. So I think there was an over hiring and putting as they say, put the cart before the horse. And so, so me and my manager and some of my coworkers, some people I know well, and other people in random departments, so people of all beliefs, all races, none of that mattered. People with degrees, all this, none of it mattered. So I had my job taken away just like that, So so that's where we can kind of bring in like the idea of Job, where he had everything, if you will, and then
literally everything.
Literally everything.
Literally everything.
And then like
wife, kids, any house, everything.
Yeah,
everything.
his livestock. I mean, there's
Livestock, right?
there's such a in the book of Job's real long. I think it's 42 chapters. I just got done reading it. I think it was last week. Ironically enough,
Yeah.
And I had never read it before. And I mean, there's a huge list of things that he had that were just poof.
Yep.
And then there's things that he gained that you wouldn't want, such as like body sores and
right.
illness.
Right. Well, and the whole point that God was trying to put forward with Job was to test his faithfulness. Because right away, and I'll admit this because this is what my feelings were when I heard this about Dan, because Dan and I are super close. We're brothers. We're very close. He texted me that he lost the job. I was pissed off right away. I was like, I went to I probably went to the same place you and mom and dad went to. I was like, what the hell? Why does Dan have to deal with this? I hate seeing my brother have to deal with this. I know how hard it is, how helpless you feel, and then you start questioning, be like, oh great, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? And me, I'm the kind of person that wants to solve the problem like right then and there. I don't like having to. I'm like dad. Dad, that's how dad is too.
That's where we get it, man.
That's where we get it, right? But there's nothing worse than having something hanging over your head. Dad used to always say that. He's like, I got to take care of this because I don't want to have it on my head. I'm exactly the same way. Where it's like, like I'm sitting there and I was praying for Dan, for God to do it, but also I admit I was a little mad at God because Dan's dealt with a lot of stuff. Stuff that he's come back from, but Dan's dealt with failed businesses, he's dealt with foreclosures, he's dealt with a lot of stuff in his life, where I feel bad for him that stuff like this keeps happening. And it's like, well, you kind of be like, well, you know what? Why don't you go pick on like somebody who deserves it for a little bit? Because Dan doesn't. Dan's been through a lot. So that's the place I go to right away. But then I think that's just the shock and the anger component. So
yeah,
that's the one thing that I always find interesting about Job. It doesn't really seem like he goes through that part. He kind of just, he's like, okay, well, this is what I'm dealing with, and there we go. And then God's like, okay, well, you can deal with that. Let's take away some more. And then let's take away some more, and then some more, and then some more.
Right. Right. Well, and what you're saying, and you didn't go to that extent, obviously, which we've all done, like in a moment, even if it's just for a moment, like we question God, and God isn't against us questioning Him. If you read a lot of David's prayers and a lot of other psalms, it's like he almost encourages it, like because He's willing to give you an answer. Right. But like I have it written down here in Job 2. There is a moment where Job's wife basically. No, it's a harsh criticism of God, but she says, she tells Job to curse God and die. Mm. And Job's response was basically like, what, like, no, in so many words, right. And so it's like, saying curse God, that's obviously another level compared to saying, Lord, I don't get this. Like, what the heck, we don't want to curse God. We don't want to curse anybody. We don't even want curses off our tongue.
Right.
But I think again, the parallel with what you're saying, this is why the Bible is so good, why people don't need to, you can read one verse, but it's like, it's that, I always compare it to an iceberg. You're reading what you see on the tip of the iceberg. That's what you're reading, but below the water level is the massive true iceberg. And that's the wisdom um, and discernment and all these other things that God provides through that one verse. And so, or multiple verses, obviously you should read obviously in the chapters and things as a whole to get context, but there's way more than what you just see on a page, right? Right. So
Yeah. No,
and
there is.
so with that reaction that you just said you had when you heard about what happened to me, is I just think and God anticipates that. That's just a natural thing. Like, what the heck? My brother or my sister or my parent or my kid or me, myself, that's an emotion. That's usually an anger thing or whatever, but it's not unnatural. It's our human condition. So
Right. Well, and I think that's like you said. That is a good thing to question God. To mostly, it wasn't really an anger thing. Like I wasn't really mad. I was kind of irritated by it,
yeah,
obviously, but it was a question. Like, okay, well, what is the purpose? And
right.
you and I are kind of the same in that wavelength, where we've both been in jobs that we're in it because it makes a good living. It's not because it's a passion. It's in it because it makes a good living, and that's it. I could truly give a shit about insurance, but that's where I'm at.
Right.
So it's like you got to deal with it. But me and my wife, we've dealt with the same thing. There was a time during COVID where I was having a lot of trouble at my previous job where I used to work with Dana, and it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to quit in order to get unemployment, because if they fire me, then it looks bad on me. So I took a leap of faith. I talked about it with Dan, with my parents, with my wife, and I quit my job. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a big deal because I have two kids and I have a wife and I have house payment. Sure enough, like I got unemployment like that next day. And then unfortunately our grandmother passed away and we weren't expecting to get anything, but we did, and our parents gave me some. So it's like it all got supplemented in a way that I didn't expect. And that's basically God showing up. When it happens and you're like, well, I don't know how this is gonna happen. And it happens that you're supplementing, you can still make a living and still keep going. That's God showing up. So now anytime anything like that happens, me and my wife were like, it'll be all right. God's got us. He always has. I mean, there's been hard times in the 13 years that I've been with my wife. We've had time after time after time where we're like, don't know what we're gonna do. Something happens. Still get through it. Still
Yeah,
pull through it. It could be a $10 job, $10 an hour job, driving a bus carting around a bunch of old people in Colorado Springs, but
which
it
you've
worked.
done.
It
Yeah.
worked.
Well,
So
and
you
you
know,
know, yeah, yeah. That's the thing, man. Like with jobs, I think um, having a willingness to say, you know what, whatever honest work God provides, I'll do it. And
mm,
I don't care if you are like you used to do. You shuttle around senior citizens. Like you work with. I mean, you don't work with insurance, but you work. Well, you kind of do. But
pretty much.
I tested software. I worked at Home Depot for many years. I built wind turbine blades at Vestas.
Yep.
I mean, it's like I look. If you have to be a manager at McDonald's to provide for your children and your family, then you do it. I mean, it's
Do what
not.
you gotta do.
And I think I've kind of always thought that, but maybe not as much as I should. And within the last, because I was laid off Wednesday, so in the last 5 or 6 days, I've just had a flood of wisdom and understanding with things, and then discernment, and then also perspective. And it's like, man, if some guy, because not all, not all, I don't want to do the blanket statement, but at a lot of these white collar jobs like that I've been doing and that you've been doing, a lot of people put a lot of stock in that career, which I don't even like that word. and their titles and things like that.
Right.
And everything is about moving up that ladder and about this job, this job, this job. And it's almost a way that like they justify like their being. Like
Yep, it is.
that's what their purpose is that job. And it's like that. No, no, God can give us a job for a variety of reasons. Yeah, we get to know people, meet people, sure. But ultimately, a job, whatever it may be, is how God provides finances. You can have a house, you can put food on the table, you can have a motorcycle or a car, whatever you want. And so you can put all that stock into it, and then you get a little Zoom link sent to you and say, "Hey, join this call real quick," and it's over,
Right.
like
Two
that,
seconds. Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like someone that doesn't look both ways before they cross the street. They step out and a bus hits them. It's 1 second they were there. They were just tying their shoe on the sidewalk. The next second they're not. And that's why we have to be careful of what we really are putting our focus and all our love and attention and sometimes it even becomes idolatry on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's too much stock put in that. It's not about your job title. It's not about impressing people with this title, and all this and that. It's like if you got to work at McDonald's, then who cares? You
Yeah.
go work at Burger King. You go work at a car wash. I know a couple people that work at the car washes that I work with out at the farm. Who cares?
Yeah.
They provide. They're able to pay their bills.
That's right.
I mean, so that's one big thing I learned. I mean, kind of to your point
Yeah,
there.
well, and the other thing is, well, going back to what you said, the problem with like some of these bigger companies and people that are like that with a career, I'm a career focused mind or whatever they want to call it. That's like their personality. They're so into it that it basically
Right.
defines who they are. Then they get
Right.
canned one day, they get laid off or something. It's bigger than just losing a job. They're like losing who they are. They're
Oh
like
yeah.
losing
There's
a
no
part of
sense
their
of belonging
personality.
or
There's no
being
sense.
anymore.
They're like, well, what am I going to do? This is my whole life. My whole thing's just gone. And it's like, well, I'm with you. I hate the word career. See, I've purposely made it to where I don't want to move up in my company. I'm good with where I'm at. I'm in a good
Right.
position. Because I don't need that. I don't need to move up to this point where I become that. I don't want to be defined by that. I don't want to be defined by if I'm a COO at an insurance company or if I'm, a director or whatever it is. I don't want to be that. I just want to do my job, put in my time, do my job well, and leave. That's all I want to
Right.
do. And I want to be defined as a husband, as a father, as as a brother, as a son, and as those things. I don't want to be defined by a career or by a
Right.
job you know so that I think that's where a lot of people take the misstep too. They're so worried about you know if I lose this, I basically lose my entire identity. And it's like, well,
Right.
it's kind of a big problem. You really shouldn't do that.
But exactly. And look, that's not at all to question someone's ambition or goals
No,
or
no.
dreams. I mean, all that. Look, we've been there where we tried to do our dreams, and like you said, I've started businesses. We've had a business. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it's like anything else, where it's like you can't put, like you said, that can't be your identity.
Right, right.
Your identity is you're made in the image of God. That's number one, and B, like you said, a husband, a father, a son, a daughter, a person that loves their neighbor, that helps people, that cares about people, that has morals and values, and has a willingness to help others. And, those are the things that God really cares about. He's always going to provide, but one way or another.
Right.
If He wants a willing servant. So if we're willing to be obedient, and if He's saying go work at McDonald's or go be a janitor or go to school and get a master's degree, whatever it is, then you be obedient to it. And you don't, the Bible says, don't rely on what you think you know, meaning, well, it has to be this way. I have to get this job. I have to move up this corporate ladder. Like you were saying, no,
Yeah.
that's one of the first things I thought within 48 hours of being laid off is like, it doesn't have to be a certain way. I don't have to do what I was doing. I don't have to. God can provide how He wants, when He wants, where He wants, through who He wants,
Yeah.
and when He wants. And so it's like, what if I have 3 or 4 little part-time jobs and that's how I make it? freaking awesome, cool. Or it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Well, I think what it is too, it's an opportunity for you to reassess and go
Yeah.
do something that you want to do, which is
Yep.
exactly what you did. So you can share with what you did if you want. You don't have to, but you can if you
Yes.
want, because you see that God always has something in the works, even though you might not know it. So you can share if you'd like
Yeah. You know me, I'll share anything.
to.
I'm like Michael Scott. There's no skeletons in the attic. He gets it wrong there
Right.
as opposed to the closet.
Right.
Um, so for many years, I've had a side business. I've had two side businesses where me and my friend Ray, we used to make masks and props for like haunted houses and Halloween and all these things. And we would be vendors at a show that's called Transworld. So that's a big haunted house and Halloween and Christmas trade show out in St. Louis every March or February, based on the year. Um, the square footage of the show's floor is like 6 or 7 Walmarts. Like it's just hundreds and hundreds of vendors. As far as the eye can see. There's a huge Christmas thing. There's all these different things. And so for many years, we vended across from these people. They are the Bronner family, the Bronners. And I've known them since about 2013. Um, Very sweet, kind Christian people, extremely talented, artistic people. But we hit it off with them immediately. And so we vended for them for many years. And then in 2021, when Ray moved, I started at my other company where I'm making props and stuff. And so I started vending a few years ago at the show again. And so every year I would go over to the Bronners and we would talk, and we talk faith, and we look at each other's products and all this and that. So I've known them for quite a while. So this past August, I was vending at a little show out here in Greeley, Colorado called Monster Day. And one of the Bronner sons happened to be there. So he comes up to my booth. He knew who I was, and obviously I knew who he is. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever? I know you sculpt out of clay, which is how I make my props. I sculpt in clay." He's like, "Well, do you think you could sculpt in styrofoam?" I was like, "Well, I've never tried, but I'm sure I could figure it out." He's like, "Well, here's my information. We opened up a second shop because they had moved to North Carolina. They all lived here before, but he's still here." And so, and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, cool." And I didn't really think a lot of it, and that was in August. But then I get laid off last week, and I kid you not. And me and Mom had an interesting conversation about this. It was maybe 3 or 3:30 a.m. It's like I'm out fully, and then I'm pretty sure it's God waking me up. But I'm like my dog Winston, where he can be dead asleep, but if you throw a ball, the first bounce that he hears, he'll be completely awake and completely up from 1 second to the next. That's what happens. It's like I'm dead asleep, and then I just spring up. I'm like, Jordan, that's his name, Jordan. Jordan Bronner. He's a good guy, really nice guy. And I just thought of it, like wide-eyed. I thought of his name. I was like, so I pull my phone over and like made sure I still had his contact info. I'm like, okay, I'm going to shoot him a text in the morning.
Yeah.
So I did, and then a few hours later, he responds. He's like, I explained to him in the text what happened. He's like, I always need help, man. Come on down, such and such day. Okay, so I go down there, and I'm going to be working for them at minimum part time. And so what they do is they sculpt things in styrofoam. They make sets and big giant props for places like Six Flags, theme parks, haunted attractions, Airbnbs. And when I'm saying huge, I'm talking like 15-foot like Frankensteins, or 20-foot like they had a Mad Hatter that they had made. They do a wide spectrum of things that they can make, right? So, but it's right up my alley.
That it is.
I've never really been paid for utilizing my talents, or my artistic talents, I guess you could say. So yeah, just like, wow, well, okay.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
um,
that's what you want right there to be able to,
yeah,
like you said, you've never been paid in this degree to
mm-mm.
utilize the talent that you have and you've always had. So, I
Right.
mean, that's
Yeah,
amazing that,
because I can sculpt, I can paint, I can do all the necessary things, and the skills and those talents translate. Just if you can sculpt in clay, you can probably sculpt in a lot of other things,
right,
or if you can paint latex, you can paint resin. If you can paint resin, you can paint foam. If you can paint foam, you can paint even drywall. Like
right.
it translates.
It's just a larger scale, you know.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
much larger scale.
Yeah, that's all right. Don't
Like
be in,
they
yeah,
were working on, when I was over there, they were working on some pumpkins, and so I make pumpkins. They're, my biggest one I think is like 14 or 15 inches wide, 12 inches tall. Their pumpkins are like the ones that we're going to 3 or 4 feet across, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just a little,
But
a
it'll be
little,
good for you because then, you'll be able to branch out even further,
yeah,
and then you'll learn more. And, you told me that you were going to they're going to even teach you how to weld and stuff, which is another great trait for you to
yep,
have
yep, and
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 be able to have.
carpentry. They do a lot of they
Yep.
they were building like this like kind of treehouse thing for this place, a $44,000 project.
Man,
They
yeah, that's
were building,
crazy.
yeah, and so there's a lot of their projects combine sculpting and painting with welding, with carpentry, with all these things, and so it's like this all-you-can-eat buffet of artistic
Right.
things.
Yeah. It's like Dan's just salivating at the opportunity, like get you
Well,
down there and get you going.
yeah, well, I told Ray for years, like, because we only made masks, I was like, Ray, I want a bigger canvas. Well, now here's your bigger canvas.
Right. Right.
The canvas
And
is as tall as a house, but okay.
right. Which is again, that's amazing because that you would think of that, you're dead asleep at night and that would
Yeah,
come up. That is definitely a God thing to where, you know, I think what a lot of us do, and I'm guilty of this too, when you lose a job, your first instinct is to go for something that you just lost. So like you would be going for something remote, working on the computer, testing. That's kind of what I was thinking for you, even though I know you hate it.
well, and,
But
and there's still an open door to do that and this job, because with this
right,
job I
right,
get to make my own hours. So it's like,
right. But
dang.
it's like I think that's the thing where we fall into that trap
Yeah,
where you almost it's almost like Satan telling you, well, this is all you can do. You shouldn't take the opportunity to
correct.
go and do what you really want to do and go see if there's any opportunities. You took the different approach. You're like, okay, well, here's a chance. I'm gonna go for the chance, and damn, there it is, right there. And it's like, man, I give you
Well,
credit for that because that's a hard step to take.
it really is. I mean, when you got a mortgage and stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it, look, praise God. I obviously want a wife and kids and stuff, but thank God I didn't have them at this moment, because it's like it's bad enough when you're on your own.
yeah,
Then that fear would come in. But you know, yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like my last job, it's like, yeah, I don't get me wrong, really loved a lot of people I worked with. It was fine. I could do the job, to what I needed to do. I think my coworkers and management thought I did a lot better at the job than I thought I did. But I mean, when we got my review, it's like, most jobs you give yourself a review. It's like
yeah,
I had like a 3.5, which is exceeding expectations. My boss maybe had a 3.8. So it's like, well, geez, okay,
yeah.
as long as they're happy. But
Right,
even with
right.
that being said, and it paying the bills, I could not have been more stagnant. To your point, what you were saying, where I did not want to move up the ladder, or I did not want to deviate from that team. I did not want to learn new things that were outside of what we
Yeah,
may have had to do, because I had no interest.
right.
I honestly thought I'd be shooting myself in the foot in a lot of ways, and because logistics and things like that, I could not think of something less.
Interesting.
I still don't really even know what logistics are. I'm and I mean that. I don't really know. I don't care about booking freight. But
Right.
you know, you do it because it's there, and God has made our lives seasons, and so it's like I knew how dead in the water I was with it. It's like, and I even had many thoughts, like, where it's like, I think to myself, is this company going to be around like in 20 years? Like I'd always compare that job,
Yeah, yeah,
like say dad, where he's working with the state. Okay, that you can say, hey, am I going to be here in 20 years? Like, yeah, that's a much
good
safer bet,
chance.
if you
Right,
will.
right. There's a good chance.
But
Right.
this, I'm like, I could never picture it. Like even
No.
5 years, I'm like, am I going to be testing? Like, is this going to be here like this for in 20 years? Like, it just
Yeah.
never added up to me. But um, so yeah, like you said, it's like, well, when you get in a position in life and you need to just have no pride and ask people for help. And um, boy, it's like Dad always said: ask questions, just ask. What do
Yep.
you got to lose?
No, I mean, and if you've got a contact, you got to you got to utilize the. I mean,
Yeah.
the same thing kind of happened with me. I'll just kind of touch on that real quick because it was kind of the same thing, where I talked about how I quit my job in November of 2020. Well, then me and my wife and my kids, we moved out here, and we were going to go off my wife's salary for a while, which worked. But then, it was a Biden administration, so that didn't last too long.
There it is.
Yeah, no, that 50 million, that 50 billion in Gaza to give them condoms, we got to have that. So Phil's got to get a job. So
Oh,
so I had to get a job, right? But I also had contacts. I had
yeah.
contacts from my previous job. I knew a guy who I was pretty good friends with, who was working at this insurance company. My wife actually had interviewed with them before because they called her and they were looking for a job. She was looking for a job. And she decided to turn it down because she wanted something else. But she's like, they asked her, like, you know anybody else? She's like, well, my husband needs a job. They're like, oh, we know Chris. Have him call us. Psh, I called, or Phil. Phil, sorry.
Yeah.
So I call and I knew the manager. I knew half the team. All I had to do was go on an interview, and man, 2 weeks later, I had the job just based off of what I had done in my previous job from somebody who wasn't a micromanaging psychopath. So um, there
That
you
helps.
go. But that's the thing. It's like I think that's another good lesson in this is don't this is another thing that mom and dad always taught us: don't burn the bridges. Don't burn.
Right.
You never know when you might need to go back to that bridge and see
Right.
that served you. It served me, and it's like you know, when these things happen, you feel helpless, but when you actually stop and you don't want to be a liberal about it, you don't want to go all nuts and go on emotion and everything else. You want to
No,
stop, you want to
it
think.
just makes it worse, and then you
I
make bad decisions.
makes it totally worse. You want to stop and think, okay, well, where else have I been? What else could I do? Who could I call? Exactly what you did, exactly what I did. So
Exactly.
I'm gonna give you another one. I'm gonna give you another one. You know this story all too well. It was probably one of the biggest things that happened to not only me but the whole family. Um, my wife is my second wife. Okay, so I was married before. I was married from 2005 to 2011 when I lived in Colorado. Um, One day, things had kind of gotten a little bad throughout things. We had a haunted house. There was some problems with the haunted house. You remember all this. Um, and then
No,
it,
is that the thing that caused bankruptcy for me? No, I don't remember
well, yeah, but
that.
I mean with her.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so it was a funny thing where Dan had gone somewhere. I don't even remember where you went, and she was there. And I remember him
Oh,
calling me one day, and he's like, "Your wife is a freaking I don't know what she's doing, but she was like being all weird with all these guys and stuff and everything else." So I confronted on her. Long story short, it ended up being an affair type of thing where I found something on her phone, and I kind of knew from there. So much like Job, it's kind of when you find something like that, it's not like a job situation. It's like a life situation, right? So it literally takes the rug and pulls it out under your feet.
it's
And
abrupt.
you're
Yeah,
like, wait a sec, this is affecting my job, my house. Don't even talk about the mental capacity.
right.
Um, everything, everything. It's a complete uh it's like taking your life and just blowing it up, and you got to pick up the pieces and start from the beginning. I had no idea how to handle that at all. That was just like insane. I remember just days where I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. It was like a blur, and things like that. And it got to the point where, um, you know, I was questioning if I wanted to like still be here or not, one of those kind of things. So, um, that was kind of the pain and the stuff that I was going through. Well, I talked to God about it a lot, and I always told God, I was like, the number one thing I want to do in my life is have kids, and it's like, well, that's going to be kind of hard now, since somebody decided to cheat on me and break up a marriage. So, the funny thing about that is, um, I went through. Let's see, I got divorced in August, and I met my wife. And okay, so I went for about 4 months. 4 months, or no, let's see, it's like 6 months. 6 months. 6 months between where the divorce was finalized and I met my current wife. And it's like how that happened so quickly and so rapidly. In
Right.
less than a year, I went from being married to one person to engaged to another.
Right.
And it's like only God could do that. Not only was I not in the right mental capacity to even be talking to anybody else, which I did, but I found a person that was able to take that and deal with that and find the good in that, which it's like it's hard enough to find somebody, but to find somebody like that is, I mean, you're like picking a nail out of a haystack kind of a thing, right?
Sure.
And it's like
And it's a
it's
big
pretty.
haystack. Yeah.
What's that?
And it's a really big haystack. It's like a
Well,
Walmart size.
it's kind of like those hay bales where the entire haunted house is made out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a needle in the haystack, but yeah.
Right. But I mean, when I met my wife now, I was totally upfront with her and told her everything that happened. And, I admitted that I had fault in it and I had blame in it and everything else. But I think my point is I felt basically dead
Right.
inside for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden it's like this new life is pushed back into you and you're like, well, how did that happen? And it's
Right.
like same kind of thing. You just out of nowhere, you have ambitions for something to happen, but it's only going to happen if you have the faith that God's going to allow it to happen. And if that's part of the plan that God has for you. And it's like, well, if you stop and you think about it, people always like to say trust the science, believe in logic. Well, it's like if you think about it that way, nothing would ever happen. Nothing would
No.
ever work. Nothing would ever be that way. You have to have the faith in God that God's going to put you in that situation. What a lot of people don't understand is you don't put yourself in this spot. God puts you in this spot for you to succeed in that spot. You're usually there to mess it up. And then he's there to take you up and you to put you back there and put you in the right spot where you need to again. And then you'll mess it up. And it's this vicious cycle that you go through. So I mean, we have both been through so many things that are, of course, nowhere near what Job went through, but they're similar in ways. There's still
Well,
things
sure.
that
Yeah.
knock you down and things that you're like, well, how am I going to come back from this? And there's
Yeah.
always a way. There's always a way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because what you touched on there, well, follow the science or chance or, either there's purpose or there's chaos and randomness.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you know, you don't just by chance or, accidentally have something happen and then accidentally meet this person that can accidentally help you and accidentally, get you back on your feet or whatever. Like
Right. Right.
it's all a plan. And even the taking away stuff, um, the example of Job is, he allows the devil, God allows the devil to take and do essentially whatever he wants to Job with the exception of killing him, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people misconstrue to say, well, God's partnering up with the devil and he's picking on Job. That's not it. You have to look at the whole picture. So yeah, remember, God is all knowing, Satan is not. And so therefore, God knows exactly what the end of the story is. Satan does not. And so at the end of the day, God's really just messing with Satan. Like he
Right.
lets Satan think that he has power. He doesn't. It's only what God allows him to do, but God knows what comes out of it on the other side. Satan does not.
Well,
And so, if God allowed suffering for Job, maybe he allows suffering for the rest of us, but that's because he knows what's going to come of it. It's going to make
Yeah.
us better. He's going to give us, like he gave Job. At the end of the book of Job, he blesses him with twice
Twice
that
as
he
much as he
had.
had. Yep. Yep.
And he did that after Job prayed for his friends, it says. So after Job, you know, I think he was reasonably humble. But at that point, when you're praying for others, you're humbling yourself like Christ did, and you're being selfless, and he's putting his faith in God. And he had his faith the whole time, mostly, but that act of faith, that's where that restoration comes, because that's, and the act of faith and the obedience in God to God is where the restoration comes. And so it's like all the stuff that Satan did to Job that God allowed. Well, God knew at the end he was going to give Job twice what he lost. Satan didn't know that. So the joke's on him.
Right.
And so it's like, that's actually really cool. It's like, you know, people always say, well, how could a loving God allow suffering? Well, because he knows what's on the other side of it. You're going to be better off than you were in the
Mm-hmm.
suffering or before the suffering. So
Right.
it's part of building character. I mean, Apostle Paul talks about how suffering leads to character, and it leads to all these good things from God. And the suffering becomes easier in life too, because you know how to handle it, and your faith is there, and you're more trusting of God, and you get perspective and experience and wisdom. You know, I've said this before. People, they hate, suffering's horrible. Like, that's not really. It's
Right.
not really. And
Well, the funny thing about that, so, I mean, God even allowed Satan to mess with Jesus. He messed with Jesus on the mountain and said, "Well, I'll give you all this kingdom if you
right,
just, you know, you must be hungry after 40 days in the desert. Yeah, take, come on, take some." It's like if God did that, and you talk about suffering, well, God put His own Son through more suffering than any of us have ever gone through.
right. Christ has the ultimate
Christ
suffering,
has the ultimate
and the
suffering,
Father did
so
allow it. Yeah,
God allowed that, and that was part of the plan from day one. So it's like when you look at things in that manner, even though Job went through a ton of suffering, God still put His Son through the most suffering out of anybody ever,
oh, yeah,
because that was to prove that that's how much He loves us, and that's what He's willing to do for us to get us in the right spot. Now, everyone's going to deal with suffering. That's just part of life. If you think you're exempt, well, you're either Taylor Swift and you sold yourself to the devil, or you know, everyone's going to go through suffering of some kind. Everyone, and that's just the way it is. Now, some of that is a test in faith. Some of that, most of it, usually is self-inflicted. It's
yeah.
something that you've done.
It oftentimes can be, and
Right.
sometimes you're essentially doing darn near everything right, and it's a
Yeah.
choice of another person.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
but regardless of how it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and you have to adjust to it. There's things that have happened to me where it's somebody else's fault, and it's like, okay, well, that is what it is. I have to deal with it, and I have to handle it in a better way than they did. It's like what happened to us with the thing in November where we got people calling us out on and this and stuff. It's like, okay,
yeah,
well, that happened. I'm gonna get my couple licks in, but then it's gonna be done, and I have to deal with it. I can sit here and I can cry about it forever, or I can move on from it. Suffering is also a choice too. Some people like to be stuck in suffering. You
well,
know,
there's things that come out of it, such as like a victimhood mentality, which you're there
victimization.
for.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you've got people kind of pandering to you more and more, and um, it'll also attract the enablers, and then
Right. Right.
and then though they're enabling you to continue in that pit, if you will, or it's like kind of like the misery loves company thing, and they get
Yep.
around the same
Yep.
people, and they're all miserable together, and you want to break free of that. You don't want to live in that bondage and those chains.
No, no, because that's you're never gonna get out if you do. You're just gonna sit there and be a miserable person, and no one's gonna like you, and
Right.
and you're not gonna like the biggest thing is you're not gonna like yourself, and
Yeah.
then you're not gonna go anywhere because no one's gonna want to be around you except for the people that hate themselves. So I guess y'all
Right.
hate yourselves together or something, whatever that is. It sounds like
Yeah. Yeah.
sounds like one of those parades, if you know what I mean.
People cope together, don't they?
Yeah, yeah, cope together. So
But coping should actually be dealing with something.
not saying yes, yes, what that nasty president did. It's just horrible,
Yeah.
horrible. So, what would you say? I've asked you this question before, but a lot of people, I'll go back to what you said before about, you know, everybody goes through the suffering and stuff, and that's just going to be a thing. But like there's some people they'll say, well, I've lost a child or I've lost, a wife or whatever, and that's the suffering, and I can't deal with it. Like what would you say to people like that?
Well, obviously, those are the worst of the worst. Those are the
Yeah,
horrible
they are.
things.
They are.
We've all lost loved ones, but I imagine, like, say, like with your situation, like a divorce, that betrayal, right, of a
Hmm.
spouse. That, I mean, that's one thing that led to Christ being crucified. Was the betrayal of
Sure.
Judas, who we thought was a friend. And so that's why, to me, that's why when we are betrayed by people, that's why it hurts so much, because that's something that directly happened to Christ that really kind of got the ball rolling, if you will. And so, there's no easy answer to say, well, how do you deal with, like, oh, that, or, I mean, your example is like the worst one possible of, like, hardship is like your child dies or something. Well, Job had, I think it was 7 children die,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then the Lord blessed him. I could be wrong on the number, but the Lord ended up blessing him with 7 children. I'm not sure if he restored the same children or if they were new, but he restored it all. But I think with that is, like, if you don't have faith and don't believe, in Christ and the afterlife and the gospel of Jesus, then it's much harder to cope, because you're trying to get a rational understanding of what's going on, and you think your child's lost forever. Well, you know, children up to a certain age are still completely innocent. Like, they don't know. You got to say you lose a 2-year-old. That child barely knew right from wrong. That child is, if they're gone, they're in heaven. They're with God,
Right.
and that doesn't bring them back here. But this is why all the funerals we've had, like, say for, like, Grandma Picarni. I mean, I know you didn't make it, but no, the fellowship and the other believers there. It's like, yeah, you're sad, but you're not really.
Yeah.
You know that death is part of life, and you know that you're going to see your grandma again, and that she, the Apostle Paul says to die is gain. Well, she gained,
Right.
so
Right.
so that she's fully restored now, and so it's like, well, I think that's the answer to your question, is like, it's again, it's like with Job, it's like faith in God, and you know knowing that God takes care of his children, because when a Christian dies, they are with God, and the Bible is clear about that. And so we all know that this life is temporary.
Hmm.
I can't fathom the pain of losing a child, for example. Um, as to why it happened, or did those parents deserve that? I have no answer for that. It's If that happens, it's not that the child did something wrong. It's not that the child's parents did something wrong. It's not this big punishment from God. He's throwing lightning bolts, like people like to think.
Yeah. People like to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the other thing is, like, well, people want to say, well, what did the child do to deserve it? How's that a loving God? Well, God tells us, like you said, there will be suffering in this life and there will be hardship, and God does not impede on our free will. And so we also live in a fallen, dying world where the devil runs amok, and there is sin, and a lot of that comes through our free will, because we have the choice to sin and do evil if we so choose. And so there are natural disasters, there are bad things in this
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah.
there's not an answer to every little thing or major thing that happens that's bad or for the negative.
No.
But you just know that God has made it right, whether we see it with our own eyes or it's in the heavenly realms. He's made it right. And so that, yeah, it's hard to walk around and be like, yeah, that sucks. Like, those plane crashes happened recently. Well, why would God allow that? Well, God didn't
God
allow that.
didn't allow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
It's
free
free
will.
will.
Like,
Yeah.
in the story of Job, yes, he allowed it, but he does allow some suffering, like you said. But it's not like he's like, I'm going to strike down this plane full of people. It's like, it's not like that. I mean, a plane is a man-made thing. There is error in it,
Yeah.
and things can happen. And, um, you know, there's no like solid answer for like, I can't explain why did this tragedy happen, Dan? I want a direct answer. It's like, well, it's a fallen, messed up world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that God's not there. It certainly does
Right.
not mean
Right.
that.
Well, and that's the excuse that people like to use is they, they want an answer for everything. There's some things you just can't give an answer to, when
Well, we're
when
not
it
all
comes to,
knowing, are we?
right. Exactly. That's exactly the point. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like like with the divorce, when you get divorced, like it's kind of like somebody died. It's almost kind of worse in the instance that they're not dead and they're still here, and
Right.
and you're just not with them anymore, right? So that was one thing that I had a hard time wrapping my head around. It's like the marriage is dead, but the person is still alive, and obviously, in my case, I don't talk to the person. I have no
Right.
reason to. So that's kind of the hard thing, and it takes a long period. For me, it took several years of like self reflection, which is another thing that I would really suggest people to do too. When something bad happens to you, look at yourself in the mirror as well. Because
Correct.
you can sit there and blame everybody else you want. Now, Dan's instance is probably not a good example of that because Dan really didn't do anything wrong to get laid
This
off. So
time,
this
yes.
time, right, yeah.
The
There's been
one
others,
time I can say totally 100%, it wasn't my fault.
but it took me many years of self reflecting and looking at myself and saying, okay, well, I can blame this person to death of what happened, but where was my hand in it?
Right.
My hand wasn't the ultimate act that broke it and killed it, but I had a hand in it. I had plenty of hands in it of not listening, not being there, thinking my way was the best way. Uh, many things, being immature. I was 25 when I got married the first time. I was too young and didn't know what I was doing, you know, and also basically using all that as learning lessons to get it right the second time. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
That's
you
the hope.
that's
That's
the hope.
part of it.
Now,
That's
if you're Charlotte Flair, if you get divorced, you just change your face. You change your face, so you got a new face, new face, new me, and there you go. You're good. It's a
no,
just
the
got a new
changing
face. We're gonna get a new husband.
right. The changing should be getting with God, and so He can change your heart, not your face.
Don't
Well,
do that.
that's the thing too. Is
The vanity. The vanity.
well, of course, but and I'm not suggesting with your first marriage this was the case, but in a lot of instances it is. With marriage is a good example. I can go out and marry somebody. You can go out and marry whoever you want. God does not impede on our free will.
Right.
He will show us the path to take. We don't have to do it. He will expose a million red flags, if you will.
Yeah.
You can ignore them. I mean, you could go marry whoever you want, and that was not necessarily God's will. And then whatever happens,
Right.
that's kind of on you, like you just said. And so if I go up, say I'm just walking down the street and I'm at a street corner and there's a guy waiting for a bus and I just go up and I punch him in the side of the head. Is it God's fault if that guy beats the living hell out of me and I end up in the hospital? Well, God, why didn't you protect me?
Right.
You just hit him in the face.
Yeah.
So it's like
exactly.
what you said is so important and so wise because people want to blame God, but they never want to blame themselves.
Right.
And that is because, again, we're not saying that Job necessarily did anything wrong. He's not always the example of suffering, but he's a great example of suffering. But, I don't know necessarily what he did wrong per se, which is a good example because you may not do anything wrong, but it
You
can
might
still
not.
happen.
Yeah. It might just be a test of faith. And for
Yeah.
Job, I think that's what it was. It was a test of faith. It was a
Yeah.
test to say, if I do all this to you, are you going to respond? Are you going to
Right.
how are you going to respond? Are you going to still have faith in me? Or are you going to say, screw you, do you
Right.
took everything away from me? Why should I have faith in you? Why should I
Right.
believe in you? Those were the options that were given to him. So
Yeah. And he, with all that suffering, still did the right thing and kept his faith.
Right.
And so, as opposed to just what his wife suggested in cursing God and saying, well, forget this and forget God. And he wasn't going to sit there and blame God, and he kept his faith, albeit I can't imagine it was easy. It isn't always easy. But again, God is not against us. He is for us.
Right.
And no one wants to blame the devil or themselves, but they want to blame God. Even people who don't believe in God will curse God, which I see a lot, which is, that's a little odd. I'm not cursing Odin or
Thor,
some god like that I don't believe in. It's like,
Buddha.
I
Curse you,
don't think
Buddha,
of
and
that.
your oranges.
Yeah, yeah. And I think because there's a lot of people out there that's like they claim that they don't believe in God, but in actuality, what it is they're mad at God.
Right. Well,
And
that's 90% of the people
yes,
because they
yes,
do. They've just had a bad experience either through one of three things. They've had it through a something that's happened to them. They've had it through the church, which is really to blame for a lot of
church,
stuff. The
or
church is
yeah,
very much to blame, or maybe it's just something that caused them to fall away in their own personal mind. But the church, honestly, the church is a big cost. That's why I said at the beginning the term religion is bad because the term religion has
yes,
taken more people away from God than Satan ever could.
right, right. Because Satan gets into the churches, as they say, wolves in sheep's clothing, and
Right. I
it's
mean,
certainly
every
not
person
all of
I
them, but
ask, every person I talk to, I've talked to several people. I've talked to people through the toy community. I've talked to people that I know at work and stuff. Every person that says they don't believe in God that I've talked to in the last few years, it's the same story. Well, I
yeah,
had a
I
bad
know
experience at
exactly.
church, or I had this parent that was really religious and too overbearing, or this or that. It's the
Right,
same story every time.
right. And I understand that to a degree, but there is that reasoning as well, though, to turn your back on God or not believe or be angry at Him. It's filled with massive plot holes and lack
Oh, of
of
course.
understanding and logic, but mostly understanding of what the gospel really is. Where not it's a life where number one, you don't put your faith in man, and number two,
Exactly.
your life is not how you think it should be. And I think that you know people don't get what they want, or it doesn't go how they think it should, or this person did this or said they did the wrong thing or said the wrong thing, and you made that choice to turn your back on everything.
Right.
Not
They didn't
everybody.
tell you to, yeah, they didn't say, "Hey, this is how it is. Now you leave." It was your choice. It was your free will
Right.
that made you leave and
Right. Well,
use
exactly.
that
I mean,
excuse to not believe now.
right. Yeah, exactly. Because I know you have, but I have too, where I've had plenty of Christian people treat me worse than, say, maybe some atheist people, but
Hmm.
they're individuals. Everyone that God has ever made is an individual. No two people have been the same. And so it's like that person, if they treated you poorly from the church, they have a problem.
Right.
And so you don't let that come in. Don't let Satan use that person to lie to you and twist it and say, see, Christians are bad, so therefore God's bad, therefore God must not exist, or God
Right.
hates you, or whatever.
Right.
No, that person is in error. Okay, we're
Yep.
all in error at some point. And so it's like, you know, like the term church hurt. Well, I've had that where a Christian
Oh yeah.
or even a legit Christian, whatever,
I
does
mean, all the
something and
time. Yeah.
it's terrible to you. But what about all the Christians that don't do those things?
Right.
It's a cop out, and it's an easy way to run from God.
Oh,
It's like this one Christian said something I didn't like. I'm done. Well, that's
and you're
silly,
taking like one church.
right?
You're because it was one church that did that to you. Like, I'm not super happy about the church that I'm going to right now. So what am I doing? Hey, I'm gonna go try another church. Wow, what a novel concept.
There
Oh
you
my
go.
gosh.
There you
Yeah,
go.
it's
Because
like
people aren't perfect, and most people are in error. And a lot of these churches, maybe they're making a mistake, or some are doing wrong on purpose. Many
yeah,
do that. I mean, a
yeah,
lot of false prophets, a lot of false preachers out there, more than not. So you have to understand God calls all this stuff out in the Bible. Again, He's already telling you what's going to happen in your life, and so it's like it takes way more effort to go against God than it does to be with Him,
mhm,
because He's given you. I don't even want to say blueprints because that's an undersell. He's given you basically everything in His Word, like that can and will happen.
yeah,
Everything. You're going to meet wolves in sheep's clothing, meaning people that are in the church claim to be a Christian and then they
yeah.
knife you in the back. Like, he lays it all out.
Yep.
So
Yep. It's
yeah,
true. It's true. And well, and going back to the church, it's like, you're again, you're kind of using one thing as an excuse. Maybe that person doesn't really have faith in their hearts. Maybe they're
correct.
like, I just need a reason to not believe. I've heard that.
They're
I just
looking
need a
for one
reason.
thing.
Looking for one thing. It's like, oh, there it is. There it is. Now I can go be a dick.
Well, there's
That
people
I
that are
mean,
married that do that. Oh,
yeah,
you don't make me happy. You didn't take the trash out. They
right.
find one thing.
It's like, well, you don't make me happy either by nagging me all the time. So, but I'm still here. It's like that. You know, but
Right.
again, you see where it lies. We've talked about this so many times. Me, 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 me.
Yeah.
That's another example of a religion itself, because then you're saying, oh, this church is
Me.
saying me, and instead of going and doing the right thing and saying finding the proper church where they can bring you up instead of tear you down, you say, well, they did me dirty or they hurt me, so I'm going to renounce everything.
Yeah. So you throw the
you
whole
know,
thing out.
it's like, come on, that's insane. That's
Well,
ridiculous.
yeah, and you're spot on because I think the problem is that most people they like to maybe talk about the idea of like how humble, humble, but no, most people don't actually want to be truly humble. Where
Right.
it's not about them, and they're essentially third. God, your neighbor, and then you.
Yeah.
They don't want to. They don't want to be second. And we all have moments of that
No, they
happen.
want to be first. Want to be first.
Right. And so, you know, that is a massive problem because again, someone like Job, he could have been like, "Oh, this all happened to me. Forget it. I'm out. My
Yeah.
wife's right. Forget God. I'm done." Uh, Meanwhile, all that I've lost is still lost, so I didn't get any of that back.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and now you're just completely faithless, and you're just running on things like bitterness, anger, resentment, anxiety, depression, stress, and there's no answer. Then what are you going to for an answer? And you're basically like a fly that's trapped inside. It keeps flying into the glass and going. It never
Yep.
gets to its destination,
Yep.
and it's looking for it, but it has no idea where it's going. And that's why um, it's so important to have God and have something above you because we don't make the right answer. We don't make the right decisions all the time, do we?
More times no than yes.
Yeah, and we don't only meet people that are nice to us and help us, do we?
Most
Uh,
definitely not. You're going
so
to meet a lot of
you could
jerks.
go on and on with reasoning of why we need God. We need God for all things. He's not just for Sundays or this or that. No, it's like God needs to be at the center of my job, the center of my marriage, the center of every relationship I have, friends, family, and otherwise. He needs to be at the center of my decision making of what house do I need to buy, what car do I need to buy, what do I do with my finances, you name it. At my politics,
Yeah.
gosh, I'm a Christian, but I voted for the pro-abortion candidate. What?
Right.
No. Um,
Right.
so it's like the faith has to be there in all aspects of your life, not just like we said, the all you can be faith. It's like, well, I want the chicken, so I'm getting that, and I want the Jello, but I didn't get the rice, I didn't get the beans. No, it's all or nothing. So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
we could go
Absolutely right.
on for a long time about this.
We could, but we're not going to.
No.
I think we're there. So, all right. Well, good talk as always. Glad you got something on the horizon. Glad you got something.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, God always
Going.
provides, man. And
Yep.
that I will say one last thing is when the Bible says don't rely on what you think you know, it means it. I am not going to decide how God provides for me.
Right.
Your
Right.
heart has to be soft and open and your mind open to what he wants. And it's probably not going to be anything in the realm of what you thought it would be.
True.
So
True.
you have that willingness.
True. Well, hey, you're getting an opportunity to use your talents, so knock it out of the park, man. I know you will.
If I could do the testing stuff that I know nothing about, I think I'll be okay with something I actually
I
know.
think you're
I
getting into
hope.
something,
I
yeah,
hope.
you've been doing for the last 20 years. I think you'll be all right.
Yeah. If I screw this up, I should just get hit by a bus. Like
You ain't gonna screw this up.
yeah.
All right. Well, for everybody that tuned in, thanks for tuning in. We will see you guys next week. Bye. It does that every time. I hit end stream and it never ends. Piece
Yeah,
of
it
crap.
keeps counting the time.
Hold on.